So I will present you policy elements of the French post-accidental approach following a nuclear accident. As I will show you, it has been developed since 2005, but it was clearly emphasized by the Fukushima accident, which happened 6 years later in 2011. I will often use in my presentation the word CODIRPA, which means in French, Comité Directeur Post-Accidentel. That's in Post-Accidental Directorate in English. In fact, the name is the name of a structure, but moreover, it covers the actions itself. Just a few words to recall you that ASN, Autorité de Sûreté Nucléaire, is a French nuclear safety and radio protection safety authority. It is an independent body from the government, and it covers its control. It is controlling the civilian use of ionizing radiation. And so we have two big domains, 150 large nuclear facilities, and on the other hand, medical, industrial, and research use of this radiation. So on this slide, you can see the structure of the presentation. So I will describe in some detail the so-called CODIRPA, and I will conclude with future tasks to be performed in this action. So Claire told me the green arrow, it works. So the post-accidental phase deals with the consequences of an accident. It covers the handling of various consequences, economic, health, social, in the short, medium, and even long term, with a view to returning as soon as possible and in an acceptable way to the preceding situation. In 2005, ASN, in association with a French minister which were concerned by the action, was designated as responsible for establishing the framework for defining, preparing, and implementing the steps necessary to deal with the post-accident situation. This is the words which were in the documents which give us this responsibility. So ASN convened all the stakeholders around a steering committee responsible for post-accident aspects, the CODIRPA, to define, prepare, and implement the steps necessary to deal with such a post-accident situation. The CODIRPA, from the beginning, is a pluralistic structure. That means that it involves, indeed, national and local administration, technical organization. I would like to mention the great job performed by IRSN, the Institute for Nuclear Safety and Radio Protection in France. It includes the operators, but also NGOs, non-governmental organizations, local elected officials, mayor, for example, professional unions, foreign radiation protection authorities from Germany, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. More or less, about 300 experts participated at one time or another to this job. So the work was performed in the first stage through thematic working groups. These groups produce technical reports and they produce recommendations. And for example, these groups dealt with drinkable water, foodstuff, radioactivity measurements, health monitoring, remediation, waste management, protection of workers, compensation, regulation, organization of public authorities, information, radiation protection culture. Then in 2009, two commissions were created, one to study the transition phase and one to study the longer term picture. They prepare a guide on the management plans for exiting the emergency phase and guidelines for the management of the transition and long-term phase. These documents integrated indeed international work that was carried out before, notably in Belarus, after the Chernobyl accident. All the documents are produced by this CODIRPA, are available on our website and are public. In 2010 and 2011, the first element of this doctrine were tested during national nuclear or radiological emergency exercise on 3 nuclear power plants sites and 1 local community. 2 international seminars were held in Paris, the first one in December 2007 and the second one in May 2011. This last one was scheduled a long time ago, but it happened to be just in the aftermath of the Fukushima accident. The work was mainly based on 2 scenarios of a nuclear accident affecting a French nuclear power plant with various meteorological conditions. One accident was with immediate 1 hour release, and the second one was with a 24-hour delayed release. Sheltering of the population living around the NPP and iodine prophylaxis were supposed to have been decided during the emergency phase inside a perimeter of 5 kilometers. Contamination levels of locally produced stuffs may exceed European food interventional level at a distance of several tens of kilometers from the NPP, several tens of kilometers. The main pathways of exposure in post-accidental situations are irradiation from radionuclide deposits in the environment and ingestion of contaminated foodstuff. A scenario involving atmospheric dispersion of plutonium was also studied. For this accident, the main pathways of exposure in post-accidental situations are inhalation of suspended particles and ingestion of contaminated foodstuff. In the event of an accident occurring at a nuclear facility and leading to a release of radionuclides into the environment, a distinction is commonly made between the emergency phase and the post-accident phase. The post-accident phase itself is commonly composed of two periods, a transition period that can last up to a few weeks or a few months after the accident, and the long-term period that can last up to several years or several decades after the accident. I will come more precisely to this distinction in the next slide. In 2012, so about 1 year ago, the Code IRPA validated and published a policy elements for post-accident management in the event of a nuclear accident. Here it is on the slide. And this booklet is composed of 4 parts. The first part, the main document, describes the objectives, the principles, the key actions, and strategic orientation for a transition and the long-term phase. The Annex 1 describes the first action to be placed at the end of the emergency phase. The Annex 2 is a guidelines for managing transition phase. And the Annex 3 is a guidelines for managing long-term period. So this booklet has been translated in Russian and Japanese. They are on our website. And it has been translated in Russian, but the definitive version is not completely finished. We need some work on our Russian translation. We work at our French embassy in Moscow. Nevertheless, it has been already widely distributed to stakeholders. So lasting contamination of the environment by radioactive substances following a nuclear accident creates a complex situation. It affects every aspect of populations' lives, including the economy of a territory. Many uncertainties regarding environmental contamination and population exposure mark the exit of the emergency phase. Beyond the health-related aspect, managing the consequences of a situation following a nuclear accident is to take into account many issues, in particular social and economic. It involves many stakeholders, both at the national and local level, covering a variety of areas of skill and concern. It is just necessary to prepare in advance implementation of action to protect the population. 3 strongly connected fundamental objectives form the basis of the post-accidental action: protecting the population against the dangers of ionizing radiation, providing support to the members of the population who have suffered the consequences of an accident, and preparing the social and economic recovery of the affected areas. Regarding those actions, 4 principles very close to ICRP 103 and 111 are also identified. First principle, the anticipation. That means that the issues related to nuclear post-accident management must be taken into account immediately on the emergency phase is over. Consequently, the first actions for the protection of the population must be planned in advance. The next 2 principles are well-known principles of justification and optimization. Regarding optimization, it means that the expected benefit of the actions planned and started, in particular in terms of radiologic harms prevented, must exceed the risk and drawbacks inherent in their implementation. Regarding optimization, it means that population exposure to ionizing radiation must be kept as low as reasonably possible. It's the so-called ALARA principle, taking into account economic and societal factors. The last one, the last principle, is the principle of co-construction and transparency. The management of post-accidental situation must involve the population, the elected officials, the social, economic, and communication stakeholders. The transparency of information is indeed a corollary of that. As I told you, in the event of a nuclear accident, an accident in a nuclear facility, NPP or other, and leading to a release of radionuclides into the environment, the distinction is commonly made between the emergency phase and the post-accident phase. During the emergency phase, management efforts focus on the accident and its immediate consequences. This is direct exposure to radioactive release. The emergency phase generally consists of three parts: a period of threats resulting from failing in the facilities, during which the operator implements initiatives to return to an adequate level of safety and thereby prevent potential releases. A period of radioactive releases in the environment if the operator have not succeeded in its operation to prevent release, and a post-emergency phase period during which the facilities return to safe operating conditions, significant radioactive release ceases, and any other threats of release disappears. The emergency phase is characterized by the need to take action very quickly in order to cope with the actual or potential release of radioactive substances into the environment. Likely, this is release likely to lead to substantial potential exposure. The post-accidental phase itself is commonly composed of two phases: a transition phase that can last up to a few weeks or a few months after the accident. During this period, the understanding of the actual states of contamination of the environment is still imprecise. The risk of chronic exposure in an individual can still be high. The other period is a long-term period. It can, as I told, last up to several years or several decades after the accident. It is characterized by the lasting contamination of the territories impacted and the lower but still lasting risk of chronic exposure to individuals. To manage the post-accidental consequences of an accident, the CODIRPA has defined two zones with distinctive purposes: the Public Protection Zone, ZPP from French acronyms, and the Territorial Surveillance Zone, the ZST, the same from French acronyms. So the post-accident zoning is established on the basis of predictive modeling of the future population exposure. The exposure takes into account atmospheric radioactivity in the inhabited zones and food chain contamination due to radioactive deposition. It is established on the basis of dosimetric guidance values taking into account the latest international references and European regulatory framework. Inside the public protection zone, actions are needed in order to lower as much as possible population exposure to ambient radioactivity and ingestion of contaminated food. In this zone, the characterization process must be focused first and foremost on the places where the population spends time, homes, schools, workplaces, and the sector presumed to be most exposed to radioactive fallout and those closest to the accident site. Immediate delineation of this public protection zone, ZPP, for the contaminated area provides the structural framework for early decisions at the end of the release. Initial protection measures are to decide about the long-term evacuation and reallocation, to organize food bans of locally produced food and feedstuff, to engage the first cleanup operation within urban areas. Information centers for the affected populations are to be opened for the organization of medical and psychological care, human radiation monitoring, financial support, and compensation. The radiological characterization must concern primarily the environment, foodstuff and drinking water, waste and manufactured products. The second zone is a territorial surveillance zone. It is broader and more focused on economic management. This is characterized by lower environment contaminations that does not require the automatic implementation of population protective actions. In this zone, characterization will focus on goods most sensitive to radioactive fallout, originating from the sector presumed to be the most exposed. Thus, farm crops to be harvested and placing on markets the short-term and foodstuff from farming, gardening, or occurring naturally will be dealt with as a priority. The extent of this area is, however, likely to decrease during the first months of post-accidental phase with the decay of short-lived radionuclides and following measurements results. The transition period is characterized by changes in the radiological situation as well as in the economic and social situation. By need for a flexible management strategy based on evolving decision-making criteria, protection actions implemented at the exit from the emergency phase shall be continued. Some of them may evolve to adapt the initial post-accident zoning to take into account results of the radiological surveillance of the environment, to set up a radiation monitoring strategy to take in order to free locally produced foodstuff and manufactured product, and to gradually replace the temporary waste management solution selected at the exit from the emergency phase by long-term management solution. During the transition period, management efforts will have to shift into an increasingly participatory mode, in particular with a greater involvement on the part of the local authority in the decision-making processes. This is necessary will bring about regular adjustment to the post-accident management program. The post-accident management program is to be developed along 10 lines of action: lowering population exposure to deposit radioactivity, improving the radiological quality of the environment, managing waste, refining understanding of radiological situation in the environment, receiving the populations, addressing public health issues, providing grants and compensation, informing, improving stakeholders' involvement through a well-designed governance mode, supporting and redeploying economic activity. The transition period comes to an end when the situation in the territory is stabilized. That means that a relative good understanding of the contamination in the environment and the population exposure condition has been developed. The post-accidental zone is stabilized. The first questions regarding the future of the person affected have been addressed in a coordinated manner. The public authorities have implemented an initial post-accident management plan. As a result of the actions already initiated during the long term, it is important to provide support to those who have chosen to remain, to continue to monitor radiological conditions, to ensure the radiological, medical, and epidemiological follow-up of persons, to improve the radiological quality of products, and to maintain and redeploy activity across the territory. I will now present in 3 slides what is coming next. So the government is renewing its national plan on nuclear emergency, taking into account the CODIRPA recommendation. In particular, the main post-accidental protective action to be decided in the public protection zone at the end of the emergency phase are included in the plan. The Prime Minister has decided recently to update local emergency plan. I spoke before of national one. Local emergency plan have to be updated, and they have to introduce the main post-accidental protective actions. And the CODIRPA will assist in the preparation of tools to support the local declination. And the CODIRPA will participate in the dialogue with the state services in charge of the preparedness at the territorial level. The Prime Minister has also recently requested ministry concerned, health, agriculture, environment, economy, and so on, to develop roadmaps taking into account the CODIRPA recommendation for the transition period. The CODIRPA will have 3 new objectives: to accompany the preparation of the post-accident management at the territorial level on each nuclear facility site. That means transfer the doctrine to the elected official, association, economic stakeholders, ensure the information, training of local stakeholders, test and complete the post-accidental doctrine. That means take into account various accident scenarios, including those involving long-term releases of radioactivity in the environment, as have been seen in Fukushima. Indeed, analyze the feedback of preceding real accident, Fukushima, Chernobyl, and from crisis exercises. Further, some topics related to the beginning of the transition phase, like sea contamination, management of manufactured products, waste management, stakeholders' involvement. Take into account ERCA work. ERCA is a group of the European head of a radio protection authority. And so that to organize exchange with neighboring countries from France and to participate to international organization work. Come up to my conclusions. And the development and publication of the policy elements for such a post-accidental management in the event of a nuclear accident is an important first step in preparing for the management of nuclear post-accident situation. As a nuclear accident cannot be completely ruled out, it is important to continue and intensify the process of preparing on such post-accidental actions. By initiating the planning of the first protective actions to be implemented at the end of the emergency phase, to be able to organize it quickly in case of a nuclear accident, and by preparing in advance the health, social, and economic elements that would be necessary to establish, in the first month of an accident, the first national plan for the management of contaminated territories. I thank you very much.